I'm 54 and I'm Ruth Caldwell. I never expected to become the talk of my daughter's wedding for all the wrong reasons. When Sophia mocked my simple life as an English teacher in front of 200 guests, I just smiled through the pain. Little did she know her future father-in-law's boss was about to change everything with just a few words. If you'd like to hear how a mother's quiet dignity led to an unexpected twist of fate, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me for a story about humility, redemption, and unexpected second chances. I used to think I had built a pretty good life. For 25 years, I taught high school English in the same school in Burlington, Vermont. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved introducing young minds to Shakespeare, Austen, and Fitzgerald. I had a comfortable routine, walking the same hallways, grading papers at the same desk, watching generations of students grow and graduate. My husband, Thomas, was a talented local pianist who played at restaurants and weddings around town. We met when I was just 22 at a community theatre production where I was helping with costumes and he was playing in the orchestra pit. He had the most gentle hands I'd ever seen, and when they moved across the piano keys, I felt like I was witnessing something sacred. We married within a year and had Sophia 2 years later. Our life was modest but fulfilling. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house with a garden I tended religiously every spring and summer. Thomas built a music room in the basement where he practiced, and sometimes I would sit on the stairs just listening to him work through new pieces, marveling at how I'd gotten so lucky. Sophia was our pride and joy, our only child. From the beginning, she was exceptional, walking early, talking early, reading before kindergarten. I still remember how she'd sit in my lap as I read to her class during the years she attended the elementary school attached to my high school. Her little face would beam with pride when the other kids realized she was Mrs. Caldwell's daughter. As a teenager, though, things changed. Sophia began to see our modest life through different eyes. She started comparing our home to her friends' larger houses, noticing that we took camping trips while her classmates went to Europe, questioning why her father just played piano instead of having a real job, like her friends' parents. It broke my heart to see her embarrassment when friends came over and Thomas was practicing downstairs, the music floating up through the floorboards. She'd quickly usher them to her room, closing the door to muffle the sound. I tried to explain that her father was an artist, that what he did had value beyond money, but she'd just roll her eyes. "Mom, nobody cares about classical piano anymore," she'd say. "We're not in the 1800s. Thomas would just smile sadly when I told him about these conversations. "She'll understand when she's older," he'd say, but I worried that she wouldn't. Sophia was brilliant in school, particularly in science and math. When she announced she wanted to become a doctor, specifically a plastic surgeon, I was surprised but supportive. Thomas and I had always imagined she might follow one of our paths into the arts, but we were proud of her ambition. "You can be anything you want to be," I told her. "Just make sure it makes you happy." She looked at me with teenage disdain. "I want to be successful, Mum, not just happy." Those words stung, but I tried not to take them personally. Teenagers say hurtful things. It's practically their job. When Sophia was accepted to an Ivy League university with a partial scholarship, we were ecstatic. We had saved for her education since she was born, but the cost was still staggering. Thomas took on extra gigs playing at corporate events and weddings, and I started tutoring after school. We remortgaged our house. We were determined that our daughter would graduate debt-free. During her college years, Sophia came home less and less. When she did visit, she seemed increasingly distant, almost like a polite houseguest rather than our daughter. She would talk about her pre-med classes, her new friends, whose parents were doctors and lawyers and executives, the networking events she attended. It felt like she was living in a world we couldn't access. In her junior year, Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It progressed rapidly, and within 6 months, he was gone. Sophia came home for the funeral, of course, but returned to school just 2 days later, citing important exams she couldn't miss. "Dad would want me to focus on my future," she said as she hugged me goodbye at the airport. Maybe she was right, but I spent the next several weeks alone in our suddenly silent house, wishing she had stayed just a little longer. The next few years were a blur of grief and adjustment. I sold our family home and moved to a smaller condo closer to my school. Sophia graduated and was accepted to medical school. I continued to help with her expenses, though the life insurance money from Thomas was quickly dwindling. When Sophia called to tell me she'd met someone, I was hopeful. His name was Ethan, and he was also in medical school. "He's going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, Mum," she said, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "His family has a summer house in the Hamptons and a ski lodge in Aspen." "He sounds accomplished," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But what is he like as a person?" There was a slight pause. "He's ambitious," she replied, "and he comes from the kind of background I've always wanted to be part of." Not exactly the answer I'd hoped for, but I was happy she'd found someone who shared her goals. When I finally met Ethan at their medical school graduation, he was polite but distant, clearly assessing me and finding me lacking. He called me Mom instead of Ruth, despite my invitation to use my first name, and spent most of the dinner on his phone, occasionally showing Sophia messages from what he called important contacts. That night, after Ethan had gone back to his hotel, Sophia and I shared a rare, quiet moment in my hotel room. "Are you happy, sweetie?" I asked. She looked at me with confusion. "Of course I am. I just graduated from medical school. I'm starting a residency at one of the top hospitals in the country, and I'm with someone who understands the life I want." "That's not exactly what I meant," I said softly. She sighed, that familiar teenage exasperation suddenly back on her 30-year-old face. "Mum, not everyone needs the simple little life that you and Dad had. Some of us want more." Her words cut deep, but I smiled and changed the subject. What good would it do to tell her that the simple little life she dismissed had been rich with love and meaning? She would understand in her own time, or perhaps she wouldn't. Either way, she was an adult, making her own choices. 6 months later, Sophia called to tell me she was engaged. Ethan had proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my annual salary. They wanted a huge wedding, and they wanted it soon before they got too deep into their residency programs. "Mum, we've found the perfect venue," she gushed. "It's this gorgeous estate in Connecticut, but we need to book it now, and it requires a deposit." I knew what was coming. Despite being doctors in training, neither of them had much savings yet, and they were both carrying substantial student debt despite my contributions. "How much?" I asked. When she told me the figure, I nearly dropped the phone. It was most of what I had left from Thomas's life insurance and my retirement savings. "Sophia, that's a lot of money," I said carefully. "I know, Mum, but this is my wedding. Don't you want me to have the perfect day after everything that's happened?" The unspoken reference to losing her father hung in the air between us. What could I say? She was my only child, and I had always tried to give her everything I could. "Of course," I said. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow." That was just the beginning. Over the next few months, every conversation became about wedding details and expenses. The dress, the flowers, the band, the photographer. Everything was top tier and exorbitantly priced. I drained my savings and took out a loan against my pension. My friends thought I was crazy. "Ruth, you're bankrupting yourself for one day," my closest friend Janet warned. "It's not just one day," I replied. "It's Sophia's happiness. And maybe once the wedding is over, once she's settled, we can rebuild our relationship. She'll see that I supported her dreams and things will be better between us." Janet didn't look convinced, but she stopped bringing it up. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sophia called with yet another request. "Mum, we need to finalise the seating chart. Where should we put you?" I was confused. Don't mothers of the bride usually sit at the head table? There was an uncomfortable pause. Well, we're doing things a bit differently. Ethan's parents will be at our table along with his father's boss, who's kind of a big deal. He's the chief of surgery at Boston Memorial. I see, I said, my heart sinking. Where did you have in mind for me then? We thought you could sit with some of the other teachers we invited. You'd have more in common with them anyway. I was being relegated to the background, an inconvenient reminder of Sophia's humble beginnings, but I swallowed my hurt. Whatever you think is best, honey. It's your day. As I hung up, I realized that I had spent nearly every penny I had on a wedding where I wasn't even welcome at my own daughter's table. The day of Sophia's wedding dawned clear and beautiful. The venue was as stunning as she had described, a historic estate with manicured gardens and a renovated barn that had been transformed into an elegant reception hall. I arrived early, hoping to spend some time with Sophia before the ceremony. Her bridal suite was a flurry of activity. Hairstylists, makeup artists, photographers, and bridesmaids I barely knew. Sophia was sitting in front of a large mirror, looking more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. "Mum," she said, spotting me in the reflection, "you're early." "I thought we could have a moment together," I said, suddenly feeling foolish. "Before everything gets started," she glanced at her watch, "I'm on a pretty tight schedule. The photographer has a shot list we need to get through." One of her bridesmaids, a tall blonde woman I'd never met, leaned over. "Sophia, we need to start your makeup like now if we're going to stay on track." Sophia gave me an apologetic but relieved smile. "Maybe we can catch up at the reception." I nodded and backed out of the room feeling like an intruder. I spent the next 2 hours wandering the grounds, watching vendors set up, staying out of the way. I had paid for all of this, yet I felt like an uninvited guest. The ceremony itself was beautiful, if impersonal. Sophia looked radiant walking down the aisle alone. We had discussed whether I might escort her in her father's absence, but she had decided against it. "It's more modern to walk alone," she'd explained. I sat in the front row watching my daughter pledge herself to a man who had never once asked me a single question about my life. At the reception, I found my place card at a table far from the bridal party, just as Sophia had warned. I was seated with 3 of her former teachers from college, whom I'd never met, a distant cousin of Ethan's, and 2 elderly women whose connection to the wedding I couldn't determine. I made small talk and picked at my dinner, watching from a distance as Sophia and Ethan moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations from what seemed like hundreds of well-dressed guests. Many of them I didn't recognize, colleagues, mentors, and connections in their medical world. After dinner came the speeches. Ethan's father, a distinguished-looking surgeon, spoke at length about his son's accomplishments and bright future. He barely mentioned Sophia except to say that she was a fitting partner for a man of Ethan's caliber. Then it was Sophia's turn. She looked nervous as she took the microphone, something I hadn't expected. My daughter had always been confident, even bold. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate with us," she began, "especially those of you who have mentored us and supported our careers." She went on to thank Ethan's parents for their guidance and connections, which had helped secure their prestigious residency positions. Then, to my surprise, she turned toward my table, "And I want to thank my mother, who did her best with what she had." The room grew quiet. I felt eyes turn toward me. "I grew up in a very different world than the one I'm entering today," Sophia continued. "My mother is a high school English teacher in Vermont." She paused, and I heard a few murmurs. Was that pity in their tone? She tried to give me what she could with her limited resources and understanding of the world. She and my father, who was a local piano player, never quite grasped the kind of life I aspired to. I sat frozen, my face burning, as my daughter essentially apologized to her new social circle for her upbringing. But despite coming from such humble beginnings, I managed to find my way to where I belong. I worked hard to escape the limitations of my background. Each word felt like a physical blow. The teachers at my table looked at their plates, embarrassed for me. One patted my hand sympathetically. So while I appreciate the simple values my mother tried to instill, I'm grateful to have found a partner and a new family who share my vision for the future. I don't remember the rest of her speech. I sat there smiling rigidly, tears threatening, but not falling. I would not cry. Not here. Not now. When the speeches ended and the music started, I slipped out to the bathroom to collect myself. I stared at my reflection, a middle-aged woman in a dress that had cost a month's salary but still somehow looked out of place among the designer gowns of the other guests. Was it worth it? I asked my reflection. All the sacrifices, all the money, all the love, for this I didn't have an answer. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and returned to the reception with my head held high. I would get through this evening with dignity, even if it was the last thing I did. As I approached my table, I noticed a commotion near the bridal party. A distinguished older man in an impeccable suit, who I later learned was Dr. William Harrison, the chief of surgery at Boston Memorial and Ethan's father's boss, had stood up and was staring in my direction with an expression of shock. "Ruth!" he called out loud enough that heads turned. "Ruth Caldwell," confused. I nodded. He excused himself from the table and walked quickly toward me, ignoring the puzzled looks from Sophia, Ethan, and the rest of the bridal party. "It is you," he said, taking my hands in his. I can't believe it. After all these years, I stared at him blankly. He was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, smiling. "Bill Harrison. I was in your first ever English class at Burlington High, 1989. The memory clicked into place. William Harrison, a quiet, thoughtful boy who had written the most insightful essays on Steinbeck I'd ever read from a freshman. "Billy Harrison," I said softly. "Of course I remember you." His eyes crinkled. "Nobody's called me Billy in about 30 years. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still trying to process this unexpected reunion. "I'm Dr. Harrison," he explained, "chief of surgery at Boston Memorial. Ethan's father works for me." He shook his head in disbelief. When Sophia was introduced as the daughter of Ruth Caldwell, I didn't make the connection. It's not an uncommon name, but when I saw you just now, before I could respond, Sophia appeared at our side, her face a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Dr. Harrison," she said, her voice overly bright. "I see you've met my mother." "Met her?" he laughed. "Your mother changed my life." Now it was Sophia's turn to look confused. "I don't understand." Dr. Harrison, Billy, turned to face the room, still holding one of my hands. He gestured to the band leader to cut the music. "May I have everyone's attention?" he called out. The room quieted. "I'd like to make an impromptu speech if the bride and groom will indulge me." Sophia and Ethan exchanged glances, but nodded clearly, not wanting to refuse such an important figure in their professional world. Billy led me to the center of the dance floor, where I stood uncomfortably as all eyes turned to us. "Many of you know me as Dr. Harrison, Chief of Surgery at Boston Memorial," he began. "What you don't know is that I grew up in a small town in Vermont, the son of a factory worker and a waitress. Neither of my parents finished high school. We lived in a trailer park on the edge of town. I could see Sophia's eyes widening, her gaze darting between me and Billy. When I started high school, I was angry, unmotivated, and convinced that education was pointless for someone like me. Then I walked into freshman English and met Mrs. Caldwell. He turned to look at me, his eyes warm with memory. This woman standing next to me, who has been so casually dismissed as just an English teacher, saw something in me that no one else had bothered to look for. She gave me books that spoke to my experience. She stayed after school to help me improve my writing. She convinced me that my voice and my perspective mattered. The room was completely silent now. I could feel hundreds of eyes on us. One day, she gave us an assignment to write about what we wanted to be when we grew up. I wrote that I didn't see the point in dreaming because kids from the trailer park don't get to be anything special. She gave me an F, the only F I ever received in her class. He smiled at the memory. She wrote at the bottom of my paper, "This is intellectually lazy and beneath you. See me after class."